So I have been doing spring cleaning. Anybody else? Spring cleaning. If you're like me, spring cleaning means you discover lots and lots of stuff that you forgot. I'm cleaning out 2 offices right now, and my experience has been discovering treasures from another time and another world in boxes that I didn't open last time I moved. And spring cleaning, maybe there's something about the season, the kind of the new birth, the resurrection in the air, in the trees, in the grass, in the wind, that kind of calls to us about our own lives. What is it that needs to have some resurrection for me and for you? The story of Holy Week and the story of Jesus, it hits us at different points, in different places in our journey. Sometimes it calls us into question. Sometimes it makes us have to stop and say, where is that story in my journey? You know, there's history, and then there's mystery. There's his story, and there's my story. So much of our journey is something we almost don't really understand, you know? We don't really get to understand until, I guess, eventually find ourselves cleaning out the closet. We see pieces of our lives through a later lens and begin to have some sense of it, have some sense of what was passing through us at the time. I don't know about you, but when I think about the Buddha sitting underneath the tree, recalling all of his past lives, spring cleaning seems to be about the same thing. Spring cleaning seems to kind of call to me about remembering who I have been, where I have been, and who I've traveled with, and how constantly changing life is, how constantly transforming life is. Last weekend, I got to be in Houston for a conference for a couple of days, and I visited the church that I worked with before I worked at this one. 12 years ago, almost to the month, I moved here from Houston. I'd been on staff at another Methodist church and had a counseling center down there. And in the process of that time there, I had begun to really move in some new directions in my life. I had begun to embrace and practice some things about my own spirituality that were different than I had before. In fact, I got really connected to some Native American practices. I did some sweat lodges, and I walked a lot of labyrinths, and I did some dances with some folks who wanted to do and seek out kind of vision quest in their own lives. And those were profound for me. And in the midst of that, I planted a labyrinth in boxwoods in a garden. And I went and visited it while I was down there. There were 760 boxwoods that we planted. Me and my assistant, Marianne, right now is going, I thought I had it tough. I remember I couldn't walk for about 2 weeks after doing this for 2 weeks, but it was a beautiful garden labyrinth that people could come and walk, and that we imagined anybody, anytime, could have a place to go and find a sense of spiritual practice. And I went to visit it, and I loved it. It was so beautiful to see as I peered over the locked fence. It had grown up about this high from the sprigs that we planted, tiny sprigs. And now this hedge pathway, I could imagine at some point maybe growing up over my head. And that's scary because I don't like those kinds of labyrinths. I like the kinds that are down here where you can kind of see if somebody's coming. The labyrinth is an interesting kind of spiritual practice that emerged a while back. We offer labyrinth walks here at First Methodist. Lynn Deloney, who's standing in the back, often hosts them. He was a part of painting, getting people to paint a labyrinth that they could come and practice that walk on. It's interesting that that particular practice is a lot like going into a sweat lodge in the Native American tradition. But this labyrinth tradition in the Christian tradition goes back over 1,000 years in its inclusion in cathedrals in Europe. Many, many of the cathedrals that were built in the 11th, 12th centuries in Europe had labyrinths in them. And the pilgrims would come and they would walk the labyrinth in prayer. St. Teresa of Avila's threefold path is one of the ways that we talk about the labyrinth. We talk about the path into the labyrinth being a time of practicing, kind of purging, emptying out. When I think about all the journeys of my life, I also think about my sense of who I am being somewhat crystallized. I think I know who I am. I think I know what I'm about. I've constructed a sense of self. But when I walk into the labyrinth or the sweat lodge, I let that go. I shed that. Emptying out. The center of the labyrinth is seen as the place of illumination in Teresa of Avila's tradition. In the Chartres Cathedral, where the finest example of this still exists in Chartres, France, if the rose window on one of the entrances were to fall over, the rose in the middle of that window would fall directly into the center of the labyrinth. And the light crosses that labyrinth in a particular path every year, and they mark when the Easter festival is by the lunations around the outer corners of it. So we think about that in that place of emptiness, of kind of letting go of who we have thought we had to be, who we thought we were, that something new can emerge, illumination. And then the path out of the labyrinth or the sweat lodge is often seen as that rebirthing, renewal, new beginning, birthing whatever has come up that needs to be made manifest in the world. I tell you all of that this morning because when I think about Easter, all of those images begin to flood. I have so many images of labyrinths in my stuff, in boxes, because for some reason that image in Christianity spoke to me more intensely than the cross. The journey of Jesus was a labyrinth, not just a cross. It was a spiritual journey of having to shed and die, not just on the cross, but to die to something of the tension of what the culture wanted him to have to be. To be willing to let something new flow in and through him. And then to give birth to that in his life and in his time. As Meister Eckhart said, what difference does it make if Mary gave birth to Christ in her life and her time, if I don't give birth to that in my life and in my time? I'm convinced that we are all on a labyrinth journey, whether we know it or not. And we can either cling to the things that we think we have to be and who the culture tells us we're supposed to be and who our families maybe defined us to be. Or perhaps we can let the cracks that are already forming in our lives, that have sometimes been our greatest source of pain and insecurity, let those cracks be what makes us human. Like the song that Elizabeth sang so beautifully. You and I have a songbird in the cage. And we live in this tension. I think you and I can see it, this tension between the part of us that longs to sing and that loves to sing and that knows how to sing, and the part that wants to keep it all under tight control. We live in these dynamics all the time, and we define our lives in these crystallized ways. I want to suggest that the journey of Jesus was not just about a cross and a tomb. It was a continual journey daily of having to look at the world around him and discover how who he was had to become something more. That something was calling out of his guts to give and be and offer and sacrifice. And I bet that same voice calls inside of you too. Because you are beautiful. You're so beautiful. You don't even know it sometimes. But you're such amazing beings. You have this gift, this whole gift inside of you to give and love. The world wants to tell you got to control all this stuff. You got to keep a tight grip on everything. But when we walk into the labyrinth or the sweat lodge or the office or the school or the house, and we learn to let go, to not cling so tight, to be open to what's needing to be born in the moment through us, maybe we discover what they discovered on the road to Emmaus. That there is a spirit flowing through every person. There is mystery still in this world that we haven't yet even begun to fathom.